In this video, I'm going over the differences with the Toho Kaiju classic, Frankenstein's Monsters, Sanda vs. Gaira, and its American cut known as The War of the Gargantuas. Before starting, I should note that actor Russ Tamblyn, like Nick Adams before him, spoke all his lines in English for the Japanese version before getting dubbed over by actor Goro Mutsumi for the final cut. When being brought to America, Tamblyn had to dub over himself for the English version due to the original audio now being lost. In a way, it worked out since the monsters are never referred to by their given names in the American cut and are simply called the Green and Brown Gargantuas, as well as all the mentions of Frankenstein also being removed. To note, I'll be using the Classic Media DVD to source the footage for both versions, and the reason I bring that up now is because, as you're seeing here, the picture quality on the Japanese side is very dark. It's not supposed to be that way, and it's not just my copy. It generally looks like this for this particular DVD. I have no idea why, I just thought I'd point that out before doing this. With that out of the way, let's dive in. First thing, of course, is the opening. The distribution logos are different, with Akira Ifukube's music playing on the logo in the Japanese version, while it plays after the logo in the English version. The title cards, of course, are also different, though the Japanese version proceeds with more opening credits over the ocean, while the American cut just goes right to the ship. Though the English credits do come up after Gaira's attack on the ship. After the American credits, we cut to two policemen going over the incident on the ship, while the Japanese version sticks with the survivor of Gaira's attack, now at the hospital, and being interviewed by two policemen. This scene is somewhat cut in the American version, more on that in a bit. After that moment, we then go to the police scene that was played earlier in the dub. And after that moment, we cut to two different locations. The Japanese one has us with the police trying to find out what happened to the crew of the ship, while the American version cuts us to Dr. Paul Stewart and Akemi Tagawa at Kyoto Laboratory, getting a call from the police due to their knowledge of him studying a, quote, species of Gargantua. In fact, it's brought up twice in a scene seconds later when the doctor goes to the hospital to see the survivor. This clip is only in the American version. Playing these scenes already give the impression that the police think a monster is involved in the American cut. So do you remember that scene from earlier I said was somewhat removed? Well, it plays here, only instead Dr. Stewart shows up instead of an officer. After that, the American version then shows the search scene from earlier, only this time Dr. Stewart is present on the search with them. The dub version then brings up the monster, while no suspicion of one is present in the Japanese version. Beside Dr. Stewart being there, the clips are pretty one-for-one, with the exception of a close-up of torn clothing only shown in the Japanese version. After this, we're back with the survivor, again with Dr. Stewart present only in the American cut, and Police Chief Izumida here only in the Japanese version. The scene with Chief Izumida calling Dr. Stewart is played earlier in the American version, while it's played after the visit with the survivor here. When calling, the words Kyoto are shown only in the dub. When Akemi answers the phone, she's on it a bit longer in the American cut. When Dr. Stewart is asked to speak on the phone, two different scenes pan out. The American scene I spoke of earlier has him being asked to assist the police due to them believing a monster might be involved in the ship incident. After the call, we hard cut to the hospital. The Japanese one has the police telling him that Frankenstein might still be alive and is eating people, causing Stewart to say that Sanda, the monster they were raising, had died at Mount Fuji and that it couldn't be him out at sea. After the call, him and Akemi have a brief talk before reporters come in to interview him. This scene would play a little after the hospital scene in the dub. When we see flashbacks of baby Sanda, grunts can be heard of the little kaiju only in the American version. A newspaper shot is different in both cuts. When the fishermen are pulling in a haul, a shot of Gaira sticking his head out above the water is present only in the American version. In fact, seconds later, shots of Gaira out at sea are different, with another newspaper shot different in both cuts. At least the images are the same. When we cut to the main cast reading said paper, we get two different shots in both cuts. In fact, this entire moment is shot differently in both versions. When Dr. Stewart and Akemi are traveling to the Alps with witnesses, 3 additional scenes of them going over the measurements of the prints are only in the American version. When Gaira eats a woman and spits out her remains, a shot of them can be seen only in the American version. The shots of the sun are much less cloudy in the Japanese cut. Also, this shot has music on it only in the American version. When actress Kip Hamilton is singing, a shot of the music player is kept longer in the American version, while the Japanese version remains on Kip. Also, at one moment during the performance, there are 2 different shots of the audience in both versions. After the show, the US version remains on it for about 1 second longer before aligning back with the Japanese one. Also, music is heard only in the American version. When we cut to Dr. Stewart afterwards, the US version has an additional few seconds of him in bed. Also, there's an additional moment of him drinking water, shown only in the American cut. Different music plays from the military montage all the way up till they surround Gaira. In fact, for the remainder of the battle with the military versus Gaira, the American version will at times switch back and forth between its music and the Japanese music. When a fully grown Sanda finally shows up, 2 shots of him walking are shown only in the American version. When the characters are searching for the cells from the battle, music is heard only in the American version. A short scene with the main cast talking about the monsters and why Kemi thinks they're so different is shown only in the American version, causing us to miss this great laugh by Russ Tamblyn.
Well, maybe this time the non-violent one will win, huh?
Beautiful. When a group of people are running away from Gaira in the mountains, music is heard only in the American version. In fact, the music stretches all the way to when Dr. Stewart tries to save Akemi, while the Japanese version remains silent, at least till Sanda shows up. The American version cuts to Mobile HQ, while a shot of an empty boat is present in the Japanese version before going to HQ. The shot of the empty boat does indeed come up in the English version after the headquarters moment. After it, the scene where Sanda sees Gaira laying down has music present on it only in the American version, at least till he notices the clothes on the ground does music play in the Japanese version. When the Gargantuas have their fight, the American version has different music throughout bits of the fight. After the short battle, we cut to a military briefing moment shown only in the US version. When the military attack Gaira for a second time, music is heard only in the American cut, as well as an additional shot of Gaira running being present only in that version. Another military montage shows additional footage shown only in the American version. Also, both versions have different music. A shot of people fleeing is shown only in the dub. A moment with Dr. Stewart asking to keep Sanda in a safe environment is present only in the Japanese version. An additional shot of the military vehicles is present only in the dub. Music is heard in the dub in certain moments when Gaira enters the city. Also, many scenes for the remainder of the movie, like this moment with Dr. Stewart comforting Akemi, feature different music in both versions.
Akemi. Akemi. Akemi.
When Gaira pushes Sanda into a building, a shot of the structure crumbling is shown only in the dub. An additional scene with tanks driving by for an attack is shown only in the American cut. When the military attack the kaiju, shots of crumbling buildings are shown only in the American version. Gaira's counterattack on the tanks shows additional buildings getting destroyed only in the dub. Later on, more shots of buildings getting destroyed are shown again. A shot of Akemi in the hospital praying for Sanda to be safe is shown only in the dub, while she says nothing in the original. Additional footage of the volcano is shown only in the dub. And finally, the end title cards are different. So you might be surprised as I was to find out that the American version actually has more to offer than the Japanese one. At least at a glance it might seem so. The overall story between the two is pretty much the same, with the only element of the monsters being referred to as Frankensteins in the Japanese version, while they're called Gargantuas in the US one. You see, the movie was one of 3 films that was a co-production between Toho and UPA. When the executives at UPA were about to edit their version of this film, they commissioned Toho to give them all the negatives and outtakes to help add more meat to the overall film, which is why the dub has many shots that the Japanese one does not. The dub version also caught me off guard when I saw Russ Tamblyn's character inserted in newly shot footage, only present in the Gargantua cut. I guess you can say it's similar to how Raymond Burr was inserted in shots in the original Godzilla, only taken steps higher with Tamblyn actually being there. Also, I wonder if him having to dub his lines again was done purposely for the English version. When previous American star Nick Adams said his lines, they were in English, and nothing had to be done when brought overseas. Tamblyn's lines were also in English, but were lost when brought to America, and I can't help but feel that was a way of getting back at him from the Japanese crew. From what I gather, Tamblyn was a very harsh person during the set of the film. He was disrespectful to both director Honda and his fellow cast and crew. In fact, the only reason he even took the role was because his wife always wanted to go to Japan, and he just had to put up with this movie he felt no one would care for. Later on in his life, he would come around to appreciate the film more. And that'll about do it here, everyone. Thank you all for watching.
Such a monster come from? What forces created such a devastating destroyer? Who or what could stand up to it? Only a second mighty Gargantua could stop it. You'll see all of their terrifying battle to the death when you come to the greatest monster movies ever made.